Family gatherings should be warm and loving, but sometimes they reveal the hard truths we try to ignore. That evening at my father's 60th birthday dinner, I arrived with an expensive watch and high hopes that my years of supporting them financially would finally earn some appreciation. When my brother James raised his glass and declared himself the best son, everyone laughed appreciatively. Then Dad looked directly at me and said, "And to Buddy, our biggest burden." Before you hear what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe to join our storytelling community. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, where my parents never tried to hide their preference for my younger brother James. While he was the charismatic, athletic child who could charm adults with his smile, I was the quiet, studious one who preferred books to baseball. Our childhood home was filled with trophies and photographs celebrating James and his achievements, while my academic awards were tucked away in drawers, occasionally acknowledged with a distracted "good job, buddy" from my father. During high school, I worked 2 jobs after classes at the local grocery store and delivering newspapers on weekends. I saved every dollar knowing college would be expensive, and my parents had made it clear they had limited funds for education. Meanwhile, James spent his teenage years partying, barely passing classes, and being celebrated for his popularity. When he crashed the family car after drinking at a party, my parents forgave him immediately and dipped into my college fund to replace it, promising to pay me back someday. College was a turning point for me. Away from my family's shadow, I thrived academically and discovered my talent for computer programming. I founded a tech startup in my dorm room, building websites for local businesses while maintaining a full course load. By graduation, I had a small but growing business and enough savings to rent a modest apartment instead of moving back home like James, who had dropped out after his freshman year. Over the next decade, I poured my heart and soul into growing my company. 16-hour days, missed vacations, and sacrificed relationships were the price I paid for success. By 28, I had bought my first home, a comfortable 2-bedroom condo in a good neighborhood. Meanwhile, my family continued to struggle financially after my father lost his management position during company downsizing and could only find part-time retail work. When my mother called in tears one night explaining that they were 3 months behind on mortgage payments and facing foreclosure, I did not hesitate. I transferred the money that night to cover their arrears and property taxes. That was the beginning of my role as the family financial safety net. Over the next 5 years, I paid their mortgage every month, never missing a payment, even when business was slow. My support did not stop at housing. When my mother developed arthritis requiring specialized treatments not covered by insurance, I paid for them all without complaint. When my father needed dental work, I covered the thousands of dollars without expecting repayment. When James decided to try college for a 3rd time after 2 previous dropout attempts, I paid his tuition in full, hoping education might finally help him become self-sufficient. Beyond these larger expenses, I provided my parents with a monthly allowance that increased yearly as my business prospered. I never questioned what they spent it on, even when I noticed my father wearing expensive new golf clubs or my mother showcasing jewelry that I knew cost more than their monthly utility bills. I told myself that after years of struggling, they deserved some luxury and comfort in their 60s. For my father's 60th birthday, I wanted to make a grand gesture that would show him how much I valued our relationship despite its complications. I purchased a bottle of 30-year-old single malt scotch he had once pointed out in a magazine but deemed too expensive. I spent hours selecting a watch worth 3 months of my profit, choosing a classic style I knew he would appreciate. I made reservations at the upscale steakhouse he had mentioned wanting to try when a business colleague took him there for lunch years ago. The evening of the birthday dinner, I arrived early to ensure everything would be perfect. The private room was arranged beautifully, the cake I had ordered displayed prominently, and gift bags for all guests prepared at my expense. When my parents arrived, my mother greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, and my father nodded approvingly at the restaurant choice. James arrived fashionably late, but was surprisingly pleasant, engaging me in conversation about my recent business trip to San Francisco. For the first hour of the evening, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. Perhaps this celebration would mark a turning point in our family dynamics. Perhaps my years of financial support had finally earned me the recognition I had sought since childhood. Perhaps tonight finally I would hear my father say he was proud of me. As dinner progressed, subtle signs of the old family dynamic began to surface. My father asked James to sit beside him, in what he called the place of honor, while directing me to sit farther down the table near distant relatives. When I presented my carefully chosen gifts, my mother barely glanced at the premium scotch, before exclaiming over the knockoff designer watch James had purchased, likely from a street vendor. During conversation, I noticed my stories about recent business developments were frequently interrupted while everyone hung on James's every word about his part-time bartending job and latest girlfriend. When I mentioned the new office space I had leased downtown, my father changed the subject to ask James about his weekend plans. These small rejections stung familiar echoes of a childhood spent seeking approval that never came. As appetizers were served, James began dominating the conversation with exaggerated stories about his minor achievements. He described a simple suggestion he had made to help our father find part-time work, as if he had personally secured executive employment. He talked about a small charitable donation he had made with the bonus money I had given him for Christmas, as if he were a major philanthropist. With each embellishment, I saw my parents beaming with pride, while my own substantial contributions went unmentioned. Between the main course and dessert, my mother pulled me aside under the pretense of showing me family photos on her phone. Instead, she smoothly transitioned to mentioning a cruise she and my father had been looking at for their anniversary. "It is a bit more than we can afford right now," she hinted, showing me the brochure she had conveniently brought along. "Perhaps you could help us with a little gift. You know how hard your father works." Back at the table, my father mentioned his car had been making strange noises, and he would need a little help with repairs. James chimed in about a vague business idea involving social media marketing, mentioning he just needed seed money to get started. As they spoke, a cold realization washed over me. They had invited me to this dinner not to celebrate family, but to extract more financial support. The expensive restaurant, the warm greetings, the feigned interest in my life, all designed to soften me up for more requests. I attempted to share news about my company's expansion into international markets, an achievement that had been featured in a regional business magazine. My mother nodded distractedly before changing the subject to James's latest girlfriend, asking for elaborate details about their recent date. When I mentioned the charitable foundation I had established to provide technology education for underprivileged youth, my father's only response was to ask if that would affect the family allowance he had grown accustomed to receiving. As the evening progressed, the weight of their disinterest in my life grew heavier. They did not care about my accomplishments, my struggles, or my dreams. They cared only about what I could provide them financially. The realization was both painful and clarifying, like a wound being cleaned before healing could begin. After the waitstaff cleared our dessert plates, my father stood and tapped his glass for attention. "Before we wrap up this wonderful evening," he announced, "I would like to hear a few words from my sons." He gestured first to James, who stood with practiced confidence, champagne glass held high. "To the man who taught me everything important in life," James began, his voice carrying dramatically across the private dining room. "Dad, you showed me how to throw a perfect spiral, how to charm the ladies, and how to enjoy life to its fullest. I may not have followed your exact path, but I inherited your spirit and zest for living." He paused for effect, surveying the attentive faces around the table, before continuing with a self-satisfied smirk. "I would like to propose a toast to myself, the best son in the family. Me." The room erupted in appreciative laughter. My aunts and uncles clapped, my cousins whistled, and my parents beamed with obvious pride. I forced a small smile and politely raised my glass, despite the familiar ache of exclusion spreading through my chest. As the laughter subsided, my father remained standing, glass still raised. The room fell silent in expectation of his traditional heartfelt birthday speech. He cleared his throat and looked around the table, eyes finally settling on me. And to Buddy he said, his tone shifting subtly, "Our biggest burden." The words hung in the air for a moment before nervous laughter rippled through the room. Some relatives looked uncomfortable. Others seemed to find genuine humor in his characterization of me. My mother patted my father's arm affectionately, as if he had made a harmless joke rather than publicly humiliated his son who had financially supported him for years. In that moment, memories flooded back of a lifelong pattern I had tried to ignore. I remembered being 10 years old, crying after falling off my bike, and my father telling me to stop being too sensitive while he comforted James for much smaller injuries. I recalled my high school graduation dinner, where my parents spent the evening showing guests photos of James's basketball tournament rather than acknowledging my valedictorian speech. I thought of my college graduation dinner, which somehow transformed into a celebration of James's new job at a local bar, which he would quit 2 weeks later. Years of being the family financial resource, while being emotionally discarded, played through my mind like a painful slideshow. The burning sensation in my chest intensified, spreading up to my throat as I struggled to maintain composure. My hands trembled beneath the table as I gripped my napkin tightly. I forced my face into a neutral expression that I hoped resembled a smile, though I felt completely hollow inside. "Excuse me," I said quietly, standing and reaching for my phone. "Emergency work call I need to take. Please continue celebrating." I walked out of the private dining room with as much dignity as I could muster, feeling dozens of eyes on my back as I pushed through the restaurant doors into the cool night air. The drive home passed in a blur of silent tears and gripping pain. About halfway to my apartment, I could no longer see clearly enough to drive safely and pulled over in an empty shopping center parking lot. Alone in my car, I finally allowed myself to release the full force of emotions I had suppressed at the dinner. Years of rejection, manipulation, and exploitation poured out in gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping for breath. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from family members, primarily my mother. I finally checked the notifications to find a text that crystallized everything wrong with our relationship. "You will regret this. So dramatic always. After all we have done for you." After all they had done for me. The statement was so disconnected from reality that it finally broke through my lifetime of making excuses for them. With shaking fingers, I typed a simple 2-letter response. Okay. That single word represented more than agreement. It was acceptance of a truth I had been avoiding for decades. It was permission to finally prioritize my own well-being. It was the beginning of freedom. When I arrived home, I immediately removed my parents from my emergency contact list and called my financial advisor despite the late hour. I left a message requesting an urgent meeting the next morning to discuss significant changes to my financial arrangements. I then spent hours writing out a comprehensive list of all the money I had provided to my family over the past 5 years. The total sum exceeded $300,000, an amount that shocked me when tallied up. Before going to bed, I called my bank and canceled all automatic transfers to my parents' accounts. I removed James as an authorized user on my backup credit card. I changed the passwords on my investment accounts where I had previously shared access with my father to help him learn about the stock market. Each small action felt like removing a heavy weight I had not even realized I was carrying. That night, I barely slept. I spent hours reviewing old photos and memories, seeing them with new clarity. The family vacations I had funded where I was excluded from activities. The holidays where my expensive gifts were acknowledged with brief thanks, while James's token presence received effusive praise. The countless times my parents had called with emergencies that always ended with requests for money. The next morning, I called my therapist, whom I had been seeing for anxiety. I now recognized stemmed largely from family stress. She agreed to an emergency session that afternoon. I spent the morning in a strange state of emotional numbness, going through regular work routines while ignoring the dozens of increasingly angry messages filling my phone. For the first time in years, I did not begin my day by checking if my parents needed anything. I did not call my mother to ensure she had taken her medication. I did not transfer money to cover whatever new expense James had deemed essential. The absence of these actions left me feeling both tremendously guilty and strangely relieved, like removing a tight shoe I had grown accustomed to wearing. By evening, my family's response had escalated dramatically. My father left a threatening voicemail about family obligations and how I was destroying the family with my selfishness. My mother sent manipulative messages about her health declining due to my cruel abandonment. James's texts were openly accusatory, claiming I was abandoning family after they had always supported me. When direct intimidation failed, they enlisted relatives to pressure me. Aunts called pleading for understanding of my parents' difficult situation. Cousins sent messages about family loyalty and how I was breaking my parents' hearts. Each attempt only strengthened my resolve, as it revealed the extent of my family's willingness to manipulate rather than respect my boundaries. After 2 days of constant harassment, I sent a final warning to my immediate family. I am taking a break from contact. Further attempts to pressure me will result in complete cutting of ties. Please respect my space. They responded by escalating further. 1 week after the fateful birthday dinner, I returned home from a late meeting to find something deeply disturbing. My apartment door lock was damaged with clear signs of forced entry. Heart racing. I cautiously pushed the door open to find my parents and James inside, going through my filing cabinet where I kept financial documents. "What are you doing in my home?" I asked, my voice steady despite my shock. My father turned, not a trace of shame on his face. "We need to talk about your responsibilities to this family. You cannot just cut us off without discussion." "You broke into my apartment," I stated flatly. "We have a key," my mother replied defensively. They did not have a key. I had never provided one, meaning they had either stolen one temporarily to copy it or broken in entirely. "That does not give you the right to enter without permission," I said. "What are you looking for in my files?" James stepped forward, attempting to use his height advantage to intimidate me physically. "We need to understand what resources you have. You have obligations to this family. We raised you, supported you." With perfect clarity, I realized they felt entitled not just to my emotional support, but to complete financial transparency and access. They genuinely believed my money belonged partly to them, that my success was somehow a family resource, rather than the result of my own hard work. Calmly, I pulled out my phone and called the police. My mother began crying dramatically, while my father and James alternated between threats and pleas. I stood, silently, phone to my ear, as I reported a break-in at my address. The family panic that ensued when they realized I was actually calling authorities rather than making an empty threat was revelatory. When police arrived 15 minutes later, they took statements from all parties. My parents attempted to frame the situation as a family misunderstanding, but the damaged lock and their unauthorized presence in my home spoke volumes. The responding officers were professional but firm, explaining that entering someone's home without permission constituted breaking and entering, regardless of family relationship. I made the difficult but necessary decision to press charges despite my family's shocked protests and tearful pleas. The officers escorted them out, advising them not to contact me regarding the pending legal matter. The subsequent court appearance was difficult but clarifying. My family appeared genuinely shocked to be treated like people who had committed a crime rather than concerned parents trying to help their son. The judge was not sympathetic to their explanations, particularly when evidence of financial exploitation came to light during proceedings. "It appears," said the judge sternly, "that this family has developed an unhealthy dependency on their son's financial success to the point of criminal behavior when that support was withdrawn. This court takes a dim view of such exploitation, regardless of family ties." The result was a restraining order against all 3 family members and probation for the breaking and entering charges. As we left the courtroom separately, the physical and emotional distance between us felt both painful and necessary, like removing a deeply embedded splinter. In the weeks that followed, I took concrete steps to establish true independence. I met with a lawyer to protect my assets and create clear boundaries around any future family support. I changed all passwords and security questions on my accounts, many of which had previously been based on family information. I moved to a new apartment in a secure building with doorman service and surveillance cameras. To address my lingering sense of guilt and responsibility, I set up a modest trust for my parents' basic needs, with strict conditions prohibiting direct access to funds. James, for the first time in his adult life, had to find and maintain actual employment when the flow of money from me ceased. Perhaps most importantly, I began rebuilding my self-respect through decisive action. I stood firm despite community pressure to forgive family because they are all you have. I declined hollow apology attempts that never acknowledged the years of exploitation, only the consequences my family now faced. I spent my first holiday season with chosen friends, rather than biological family, creating new traditions based on mutual respect and genuine affection. A portion of the money previously sent to my parents was donated to a financial abuse support group, where I eventually began sharing my story with others in similar situations. The act of helping others recognize and escape toxic family dynamics became an unexpected source of healing. The path to recovery began with that painful birthday toast, but led to genuine freedom. 2 years after walking out of that restaurant, my life has transformed from constant anxiety to peaceful self-respect. I have learned that sometimes those who should love you most may be the ones using you most. Real family can be chosen built on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Weekly therapy sessions helped me address the deep family trauma that had shaped my relationships and self-worth. I began journaling to document my emotional progress, watching as entries evolved from pain and confusion to clarity, and eventually forgiveness, not of their actions but of myself, for enabling toxic dynamics for so long. As the weight of financial responsibility for 3 additional adults lifted, my physical health improved dramatically. The chronic tension headaches that had plagued me for years disappeared. The persistent insomnia that had required medication eased naturally. Even my posture changed, as if my body physically reflected the emotional burdens I had set down. Most importantly, I learned to identify and set healthy boundaries in all relationships. I recognized the early warning signs of one-sided connections and emotional manipulation. I understood that true support flows both ways, that love without respect is simply control wearing a friendly mask. The space created by removing toxic relationships allowed new, healthier connections to flourish. I deepened friendships with genuinely supportive people who celebrated my successes without expectation of personal gain. I began dating someone who respected boundaries and demonstrated caring through actions rather than empty words. Together with close friends, I created chosen family holiday traditions that filled me with joy rather than dread. At work, I found a mentor who appreciated my capabilities and challenged me to grow professionally without the constant undercurrent of guilt and obligation that had characterized my family relationships. My volunteer work helping young people from difficult backgrounds provided perspective and purpose, transforming my painful experiences into valuable insights for others navigating complex family dynamics. Without the constant financial drain of supporting 3 additional adults, my company expanded in ways previously impossible. I had time and emotional energy for creative projects I had abandoned years ago. I traveled without checking my phone constantly for family emergencies that inevitably required financial solutions. I rediscovered passions and interests that had been sacrificed to meet the endless demands of family. Perhaps most surprisingly, I learned to enjoy success rather than use it as currency to buy approval that never came. I celebrated achievements for their own sake, not for how they might impress others. I made decisions based on my own values, rather than anticipating family reactions. This newfound authenticity attracted people who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could provide. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard updates about my family. After the initial shock of losing their financial support system, they had been forced to make significant life changes. James finally maintained steady employment for more than a year, working his way up from entry-level positions. My parents downsized to affordable housing appropriate to their actual income level. Community members who had witnessed their treatment of me and the subsequent legal proceedings developed a more accurate understanding of family dynamics previously hidden behind closed doors. While I never wished suffering upon them, I found peace in their necessary growth, even if the path was painful. Sometimes hitting bottom is the only catalyst for meaningful change. Sometimes losing support is the only way to learn self-sufficiency. Sometimes the most loving action is allowing natural consequences rather than enabling destructive patterns. The path to healing began with that painful toast, but led to genuine freedom. 2 years later, my life has transformed from constant anxiety to peaceful self-respect. I have learned that sometimes those who should love you most may be the ones using you most. Real family can be chosen built on mutual respect rather than obligation. I still occasionally feel twinges of guilt, but then I remember my worth is not measured by what I provide to others. What would you do if someone you loved called you their biggest burden? Sometimes walking away is not giving up, it is finally standing up. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming family trauma, and share with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better. Thank you for listening. And remember, healing begins when you value yourself enough to walk away from harm.